The crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon slipped from my daughter-in-law's perfectly manicured hand, shattering on the polished Italian marble. The sound was a tiny, expensive death knell, utterly lost in the chaos. Chloe's mother, Beatrice, was convulsing on my kitchen floor, her body a violent, jerking marionette. A thick, white foam, tinged with a sickly yellow, collected at the corners of her mouth, a grotesque parody of the champagne bubbles that had just been there. And all I could think, with a clarity that was both chilling and serene, was, well, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because before I tell you how I got to this point, you need to understand the caliber of player in this game. Let me be perfectly, unequivocally clear about something. I have spent 72 years on this earth, and I did not survive 4 decades in the cutthroat world of commercial real estate by being a naive fool. When someone tries to poison you at your own retirement party, you notice, especially when that someone has been eyeing your bank account with the same desperate, avaricious hunger a starved wolf reserves for a fresh kill. 2 hours earlier, my kitchen had been a cathedral of laughter and celebration. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, seared scallops, and the yeasty promise of fine champagne. I had just sold my firm, Lockhart Properties, for $34 million. Not bad for a company I built from the ground up, from a one-woman operation run out of my sunroom after my husband, Arthur, passed away 17 years ago. My son Thomas had insisted on throwing this lavish party. "Mom, you deserve this," he'd said, his voice dripping with a sincerity that now felt like a poorly rehearsed lie. Those earnest hazel eyes of his, so like his father's, had been working overtime. "Just let Chloe handle everything. You've done enough. Relax. Enjoy the fruits of your labor." I should have known something was amiss the moment Chloe volunteered to play hostess. This was the woman who considered loading the dishwasher a Herculean labor, who once called a handyman to change a light bulb. Suddenly, she was Martha Stewart incarnate, flitting around my home with an unnerving fervor, arranging calla lilies and polishing my grandmother's crystal as if her very existence depended on it. Which, as it turned out, it probably did. To her credit, the party was flawless. She had orchestrated everything impeccably. About 40 guests from my professional life, rivals I'd bested, partners I'd enriched, protégés I'd nurtured, mingled with a handful of close neighbors and family. She had even hired a tuxedoed bartender who was mixing perfect icy martinis. "Nothing is too good for you, Eleanor," she had gushed earlier, squeezing my forearm with those talon-like nails that cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill. Her smile was brilliant, white, and utterly vacuous. I was making polite conversation with Charles Whitlock, my former CFO and oldest friend in the business, debating the merits of coastal versus mountain retirement when I saw it. A flicker of furtive movement near the champagne table caught my eye. Chloe was standing there, her back mostly to the room, her head on a swivel. After a final, nervous glance around, she dipped her hand into her clutch and pulled out a small, amber-colored glass vial. My blood didn't just run cold, it solidified in a glacier in my veins. I watched, paralyzed yet hyper-aware, as she deftly uncorked it and emptied its contents into one specific flute, the one with the almost imperceptible chip on the rim, my glass, the one I always used at parties so I wouldn't lose it in the crowd. A sensible person might have screamed, might have pointed a trembling finger and called her out in front of everyone, might have dialed 911 and let the sirens shred the festive atmosphere. But 4 decades of negotiating with sharks taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most effective way to catch a predator is to let it believe it has successfully cornered its prey. So I did nothing. I simply smiled, nodded at whatever Charles was saying about interest rate fluctuations, and continued to watch the performance unfold. Chloe picked up the doctored flute, the liquid inside looking no different from any other, and began weaving her way through the crowd towards me. Her face was a masterclass in feigned concern. "Eleanor, you look absolutely exhausted," she purred, her voice laced with a syrupy false warmth. She extended the glass towards me. "Here, darling, have some champagne. You've truly earned it." I took the glass, my fingers steady despite the hurricane raging inside me. "I thank you, Chloe," I said, layering my voice with a gratefulness I did not feel. I held the poison in my hand. I made a show of raising it to my lips, but I didn't drink. I merely let the cold rim touch my skin as I continued my conversation with Charles. I was waiting, watching for my moment. It came about 10 minutes later. Chloe was distracted, holding court with a group of neighbors, flashing her new diamond tennis bracelet under the lights. Standing near the periphery was her mother, Beatrice, looking slightly lost and empty-handed. Beatrice was a kind woman, but perpetually scattered, living in a gentle fog of her own making. I drifted over and said, "Beatrice, you look parched. Here, I haven't touched this," smoothly placing my champagne flute on the table right next to her beaded purse. "It's delicious. You really must try it." "Oh, thank you, Eleanor. I was just wondering where that handsome bartender had disappeared to," she thrilled, grabbing the glass without a second thought.
The rest, as they say, happened with a brutal, swift efficiency. Within 5 minutes, Beatrice was complimenting the champagne's interesting, almost botanical flavor, and asking if I'd had it specially imported. I merely smiled. Then the choking started. The gasps, the horrific, wet sound of her body hitting my hard, beautiful floor. I was kneeling beside her in an instant, while Chloe screamed for someone, anyone, to call 911. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. The trembling hands, the perfectly timed tears, the voice cracking with manufactured devastation. It was almost convincing. Almost. The problem with being a would-be murderer is that genuine panic and performative panic look very different to a trained eye. I knew what to look for: the calculated glance to gauge the room's reaction, the micro-expressions that flickered beneath the surface of her fear. "What happened? My God, what happened?" Thomas demanded, pushing through the gathering crowd. His face was pale with a shock that seemed genuine. But I caught it, a fleeting, electric glance toward Chloe that lasted a fraction of a second too long. A silent, frantic question passed between them. "I don't know," Chloe sobbed, clutching at my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "She just collapsed. 1 minute she was fine, the next." She gestured helplessly at her mother, who was now unconscious, but still breathing ragged, wet breaths. Thank God for small mercies. The paramedics arrived with impressive speed. As they worked on Beatrice, loading her onto a stretcher with efficient professionalism, I found myself studying my son's face. 35 years of motherhood had taught me to read his moods like a sailor reads the sea. Right now, he looked like a man watching his meticulously built ship smash against the rocks in real time. "Which hospital?" I asked the lead paramedic. "St. Jude's. Are you family?" I glanced meaningfully at Chloe, who was too busy practicing her hyperventilation to notice. "Close friend," I said. "I'll follow in my car." Thomas stepped forward quickly. "Mom, no, you shouldn't drive. You're shaken up. We'll handle everything here. You should stay, rest, clean up from the party." How thoughtful. Keep the primary target sequestered at home while they figured out what went wrong with their little plan. Isolate me. "Nonsense," I said, my tone brooking no argument. I was Eleanor Lockhart, and I was done playing victim. Beatrice is practically family. I'm coming. I grabbed my purse and keys, moving with a purpose that left no room for debate. At the hospital, I became a ghost, hovering just close enough to overhear the medical staff's hushed conversations. Beatrice's condition was listed as acute poisoning, cause unknown. I heard a young doctor murmur something about plant-based alkaloids and
Cardiac glycosides to a nurse. Specific. Technical. Someone had done their homework on untraceable, natural-seeming toxins. Chloe paced the sterile waiting room, her designer heels clicking a frantic, anxious rhythm on the linoleum floor. Thomas sat rigidly in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his phone buzzing incessantly on his knee. He seemed intensely reluctant to answer it. "This is just terrible," Chloe said for what felt like the 5th time. "Poor Mom. I can't understand how this could have happened." I reached over and patted her shoulder, my touch light and sympathetic. "These things are often mysterious, dear. I'm sure the doctors will figure it out." Then I added, as casually as one might comment on the weather, "You know, it's lucky she didn't drink much of that champagne. She only had a few sips before she collapsed." Chloe's pacing faltered, an almost imperceptible stutter in her step. "Champagne? You think the champagne caused this?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I said, with a dismissive wave of my hand. "It's just an old woman's mind looking for patterns where there aren't any. Pay me no mind." But Chloe's face had gone a shade paler beneath her artful makeup. Her hands developed a slight tremor as she reached for a styrofoam cup of terrible hospital coffee. Thomas was watching our exchange with the focused intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse. 3 hours later, a doctor emerged, looking tired but relieved. Beatrice was stable, but would need to stay overnight for observation. The tests were inconclusive, he said, but whatever she'd ingested was slowly working its way out of her system. "Can we see her?" Chloe asked immediately. "Family only for now, I'm afraid, and she's sedated. Best to come back tomorrow." As we walked out of the automatic doors into the cool night air, Thomas walked me to my car. "Mom," he began, his voice laden with false concern, "maybe you should stay with us tonight. After all this, I'd feel much better if you weren't alone." How considerate, especially since Beatrice's medical emergency had likely left them scrambling, wondering if I suspected anything. The answer was a resounding yes, but they didn't need to know that yet. "That's sweet of you, dear," I said, infusing my voice with a gentle, weary tone. "I have that new security system, remember? Top of the line." I kissed his cheek, noting the tension in his jaw, and got into my car. In my rearview mirror, I watched them have what appeared to be a very urgent, whispered argument in the middle of the parking lot. Back home, the silence of the house was deafening. The remnants of the party, a half-eaten canapé, a stray napkin, the lingering scent of champagne and fear, were stark reminders of the night's events. I poured myself a very large, very real glass of scotch from a fresh bottle, naturally, and settled into my study. The rich, smoky liquid burned a path of steadying warmth down my throat. It was time to figure out exactly what my loving family had planned for me, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. I spent the night doing something I'd become exceptionally good at over 45 years in business. Research. Not the kind you do with computers and databases, but the kind you do with a cold, clear memory, a suspicious mind, and a deep understanding of human greed.
Beatrice's poisoning wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. Someone had planned to kill me at my own party, likely hoping to make it look like a heart attack or a stroke. At 72, those things happen. No one questions a successful woman's heart giving out from the stress of finally selling her life's work. It was a good plan. Clean. Plausible. But why? That was the $34 million question, wasn't it? As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, I made a pot of strong black coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I began writing down everything I knew about Thomas and Chloe's financial situation. The picture that emerged was not pretty. Thomas's architectural firm, which I had helped fund, had been struggling since a major project fell through last year. Chloe's interior design business was less a profitable enterprise and more a very expensive hobby that allowed her to shop for high-end furnishings with a tax write-off. They lived well. Far too well for their actual income. Their mortgage on that sprawling, showy, modern house in Crestview Heights was at least 4 times what they could reasonably afford. The Range Rover and the Porsche Cayenne in their driveway were both leased. Chloe's shopping habits, the constant stream of packages, the weekly spa visits, the designer everything, could bankroll a small nation's deficit. I'd help them, of course. What mother wouldn't? A few thousand here and there when Thomas mentioned cash flow was tight, the down payment on the house when Chloe wept about wanting to raise their daughter, Sophia, in the right school district, the private school tuition when they insisted the public schools weren't adequate. Looking back at my checkbook records, I calculated I'd given them nearly $300,000 over the past 6 years. Gifts, I'd called them. Investments in their happiness. Never loans. That would have been tacky. But now I was forced to wonder if they'd seen those gifts differently. Not as motherly generosity, but as meager advance payments on an inheritance they were growing impatient to collect in full. The phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Chloe. Her voice thick with concern that didn't reach her eyes even over the phone. "Eleanor, I couldn't sleep a wink all night thinking about you. After what happened to Mom, I just worry. Maybe there was something wrong with the food or drinks. You didn't feel sick at all, did you?" How thoughtful of her to check whether her poison had found its intended target. "Not at all, dear. I feel perfectly fine. Have you heard anything more about Beatrice?" "The doctors say she should be able to go home today. They think maybe she ate something that disagreed with her before the party. You know how she is with her medications. Probably took something on an empty stomach." The lie was so brazen, it was almost impressive. Beatrice was many things, but careless with medication wasn't one of them. The woman color-coded her pill organizers and set smartphone reminders for her vitamins. That's such a relief. I was worried it might have been something at the party. That would have been terrible. "Oh no, definitely not," Chloe said, a little too quickly. The doctors were very clear. It wasn't food poisoning, just one of those fluke things. Interesting. She was very eager to shut down any line of inquiry about the events in my house, almost as if she was worried someone might get the bright idea to test the remaining champagne. After hanging up, I walked to my kitchen and looked at the bottle Chloe had opened for the party. It was still 3/4 full, sitting innocently on my counter. I wondered what a lab test would reveal. Not that I needed proof for myself, but evidence might prove useful later. My doorbell rang at 9 a.m. Thomas stood on my front porch holding a box of pastries from my favorite French bakery. He looked every inch a concerned son. "Thought you might want some breakfast," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You probably didn't eat much yesterday after everything." I let him in and made fresh coffee while he arranged the pastries on a plate. Watching him move around my kitchen, opening cupboards he'd known since childhood, reaching for the sugar without asking where it was kept, I felt a profound and aching sadness. This was still my little boy, the one who used to bring me dandelion bouquets and proudly display his crayon drawings on my refrigerator. When had that boy turned into a man who could stand by while his wife tried to murder his mother? "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, settling across from me at the breakfast table. "Oh, you know me, Thomas. It takes more than a little excitement to rattle these old bones." He smiled, but it was a tight, nervous thing that didn't reach his eyes. That's what I was afraid of. An odd thing to say. I sipped my coffee and waited. He would show his hand. He just needed to believe it was his idea. "The thing is, Mom," he continued, picking apart a chocolate croissant without eating it, "Chloe and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation?" "You're 72, Mom, living alone in this big house. All that money from the sale." He gestured vaguely around the room. "It just seems like a lot for one person to manage." There it was. The setup. "I appreciate your concern, dear," I said, keeping my voice light and grandmotherly. "But I've been managing my life and my finances quite well for quite some time."
He leaned forward, his expression a mask of earnest worry. Have you, though? I mean, yesterday's accident with Beatrice. What if that had been you? What if you'd collapsed and no one found you for hours? The audacity was breathtaking. He was using their failed murder attempt as a justification for why I needed their protection. Thomas, Beatrice collapsed at a party with 40 witnesses. Paramedics arrived in minutes. I'd hardly call that a cautionary tale about the dangers of living alone. That's not what I meant, he said, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was